put it in the right positioning in terms of quality early education and care in this part of Michigan. To say that it's a competitive advantage does not go far enough. In 2009, quality early education is a competitive imperative. And the case I'm outlining today is not the one made by early educators. And my daughter is an early educator, and I admire the nobility that she brings to the profession, and I respect the education profession. But one of the reasons that early education is underfunded is they've always put early educators out front. And that's a strategic marketing mistake. That would be like one of you coming up to me afterwards and saying, Bill, is this Scope View Strategic Advantage thing you had, is it a good company? What do you expect me to say? You expect early educators to say the same thing. And if you're walking the hallways, be it in Lansing or in Raleigh, North Carolina, whatever, the education community has only so much credibility in making that case. The men and women who need to be out front on this are business people, and many of you already are, and we thank you for that. And we hope as a result of Pat's comments and Janet's initiatives and the foundation and chamber and other work that you'll feel as though it is a matter in which you are intensely involved from not just a visceral standpoint, but also an economic one. So the case is the business case. Anybody read any of these two? In the race between technology and education, the authors both came out last fall, and they're both worth going to the library for, makes the case that the gap between American public education and that in the rest of the world has more than closed. From starting in 1870, and for the next 90 years, the average formal education level of Americans increased about 0.8 of a year every decade. So starting in 1890, the average American had about 8 years of education, and it grew very sequentially, to the point that halfway through last century, about 70% of our young kids were in secondary education. Europe, by contrast, the largest number there was 30%. The gap between us and the rest of the world in terms of formal education was substantial, and that resulted in American greatness. What's happened since, we pretty much stagnated. And the rest of the world has not just caught up, it's passed us by. Our competition, your competition, is not just other states, it's other nations on at least 4 continents, and that's true for our kids as well. The public educators in this room today, and they know this, they have a much tougher challenge than their counterparts in places like China and India, because we are a democracy, and I'm glad we are. We have a responsibility to every single child. In China and India, that's not an issue. You get your smartest people and you concentrate your resources there. The question I would pose today is, there's a price to being a democracy. There's a price to making sure every child has the best possible education. Are we as Americans willing to pay it? And can the education system show demonstrable results that those investments have a payoff in terms of improving the lives of those kids and improving the lives of our communities? In the sandbox investment, switching over to investment, this is a look at early education as though the author hated kids, okay, looking at them just in terms of an economic commodity. And he looks at the issue in terms of cost benefit. What are we paying for early education? What's the payoff? Those of you who invest are familiar with futures markets. He looks at children as a futures market, looks at them not as children, but as to what they'll be 15, 18, 24 years out. And he just talks about the educational payoffs, but the real analysis has to do with the economic payoffs. It's a discernibly different look at early education, but it's a look that businessmen and women can relate to. It's a look that legislators, particularly in an economic time like we're facing now, they can relate to it. And it's a totally different sell than all those pictures of those cute young kids. And it resonates in areas where those pictures do not. So I'm sure everybody, as you rode over here today and you're talking about a program focusing on early education, there had to be one dominant question, this one. And I want to refute that question 3 ways. One, there are economic benefits, and we'll talk about those shortly. You don't have to wait 20 years to feel them. Those of you who have, probably many of you have young adults in your workforce, Statistics have shown that if those parents who have young children are in your workforce, if they are satisfied with the quality of early education, they don't have to worry about it, they become more productive. DuPont, for which my father worked for 46 years, did an analysis of their investment in these sorts of things and found out for every dollar they invested in things like that, they saved $7. It doesn't have to be just the big corporations. If you're a small employer and when you're interviewing people, if you say, we know that your kids' welfare is important to you, here's information on who you need to see in Holland and Zeeland in terms of coming up to speed on that. It makes a difference. There is an immediate impact. And then there's the ultimate question. What's the price of doing nothing? And we've got states, and we've got parts of states that have done nothing. And in terms of their competitive ability in the 21st century, they have slipped. We've got those communities in North Carolina. You've got them in Michigan. Places where the economy was, if it was not thriving, at least it was doing well 10 years ago. And now it is sucking wind. And there are large portions of America that are in that position. Most of us grew up in a time when America was number one and everything worth being number one at. And we've been complacent and fat and happy, and we're God's chosen people. We'll go through some statistics here shortly. It's tough to find something where America is not number one now. It's not that we're not a great country, but we've been awfully complacent for a long time. And if there's an upside to the recession, from my standpoint, it's that we've been basically disavowed of that conception. To put the early education matter in tone, let me quote a company that many of you probably shopped at. And if you're going to still shop at them, I think you got 2 weekends left. When Circuit City announced that they were folding, their chairman said this: didn't take the threat from competitors seriously enough. Their competitors were places like Target and Walmart and things like this. I would suggest that Americans have not taken their competitors seriously enough. And he also said this: concentrate on short-term returns rather than long-term value. And once again, it's tough for political systems to invest in early education. Not a criticism of the system so much, but when a lot of the payoff is 15 or 18 or 20 years out, it takes men and women of extraordinary vision to see that and make the investments that will come after their terms of office, in some cases after their terms of life. North Carolina was fortunate to have one of those men, a guy named Jim Hunt, who was our governor, and established an exemplary program called Smart Start, which is a national model on early education, and has invested in things like the education levels of early educators and the quality of the curricula that goes on in the classroom and parenting skills and that sort of thing. Probably the best thing I can do for the next 74 seconds is just shut up and let you listen. So we'll do that.